This morning, I am delighted to welcome Andrea Kopel, the Executive Director of the National Council of Jewish Women in New York, to speak about the important work of the Council, which ranges from providing social services to social action and advocacy, and in particular to speak about Reproductive Shabbat, which was conceived by the NCJW. Ms. Kopel has spent more than 25 years in New York City's nonprofit sector. She began her career at Planned Parenthood, later served as Director of Program Services for City Meals on Wheels. She carries within her the gifts of joy and laughter that she learned at the Big Apple Circus, where she was Vice President of Community Programs and later became Executive Director of Room to Grow, providing comprehensive services to families raising babies in poverty. Along the way, she earned a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard. And now in her role as Executive Director of NCJW, she brings her Jewish identity and values to their bold work, which is devoted to progressive social change, including reproductive freedom and choice. It is our honor to welcome her to Emanu-El.
Good morning. And thank you, Rabbi Ehrlich, for that wonderful introduction. It is, in fact, my honor to be part of your Shabbat service this morning at Temple Emanu-El. And around the country this weekend, hundreds of other congregations are also celebrating the critical importance of reproductive justice and learning more about Judaism's approach to abortion as part of what NCJW calls Repro Shabbat. NCJW organizes Repro Shabbat each year during the week that we read the Parsha, Mishpatim, which contains the verses that form the basis of the Jewish approach to reproductive freedom. As we learned in our Torah study this morning, and again during our service today, our Jewish tradition views abortion as essential health care, not only permitted, but in some cases commanded when a life is at risk. NCJW has been the leading Jewish feminist voice for reproductive choice for decades, and we are just getting warmed up. NCJW works for reproductive freedom, not in spite of our faith, but because of it. We must not allow one religious group to control the conversation about abortion and faith. It's time as people of faith that we reclaim it, and we must do so now, because as I'm sure you know, reproductive freedom is more vulnerable now than it has been in the past 50 years. That is why NCJW nationally recently launched its 73 Forward campaign, a Jewish movement for abortion justice. The goal of the campaign is to create a collective framework for Jewish action to increase actual on-the-ground access to abortion care, because legal rights are nothing without access, and we see that already, even before the inevitable gutting of Roe v. Wade. A key element of NCJW's 73 Forward campaign is Rabbis for Repro, a network of more than 1,000 rabbis who have pledged to speak out about reproductive justice and educate others about the Jewish texts and teachings that inform our support for abortion access. Rabbis Sepedin and Rabbi Ehrlich and Rabbi Davidson are all members of this important network, and I want to commend them for making true that pledge today and making Temple Emanu-El a community where anyone who has terminated a pregnancy for any reason feels loved, respected, and welcomed. On the local level, NCJW New York is working to ensure access to abortion care through our Pro-Truth campaign, a coalition that aims to expose and fight the dangerous tactics of so-called crisis pregnancy centers. These centers are basically fake abortion clinics, luring people in with free pregnancy tests and sonograms administered by untrained volunteers. They operate with impunity all over New York City and state, far outnumbering legitimate women's health clinics. They use tactics including lying and manipulation, and their sole purpose is to prevent people from accessing abortion. But most offensive, they use religion to justify their lies. At NCJW, our Jewish faith teaches us that no one should ever be lied to about their body. We are pro-truth. And we hope you'll join us. Thank you for having me here today, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Andrea. We are honored to partner with the National Council of Jewish Women in the fight for reproductive justice. And we are proud to stand together as allies in the ongoing struggle for abortion rights and access, a struggle which, as you noted, is as urgent now as it has ever been. This morning, we heard a piece of Parashat Mishpatim read from our Torah. The word Mishpatim means rules or ordinances, and refers to a body of laws that God sets forth for the people Israel to help guide them in building a just and safe society. Our aim today, as we spotlight the struggle for reproductive rights, is to talk about what it means to live in a just and safe society. In a just and safe society, safe and protected access to abortion must be a given. In a just and safe society, protecting the dignity and health of the pregnant person must be a given. And in a just and safe society, the assurance of reproductive freedom must also be a given. As Jews, it is incumbent upon us to engage in this complex but critical conversation. And thus, we are so fortunate this morning to welcome Rabbi Dr. Linda Henry Goodman, not only a deeply respected colleague, but also a longstanding advocate for reproductive justice, to our virtual Bima, to share her Torah and to help us move this critical conversation forward. A few words about Rabbi Goodman. First, she is no stranger to Temple Emanu-El. During her senior year at Hebrew Union College in New York, she served here as a rabbinic intern. And then, upon her ordination in 1985, she became the first woman to serve on the rabbinic staff as assistant rabbi. After serving various positions in Long Island, Rabbi Goodman was called to the pulpit of Union Temple in Brooklyn, where she served with devotion for 26 years until her retirement in 2018, when she became Rabbi Emerita. Rabbi Goodman has long been a champion of women's rights, outspokenly fighting to promote and protect reproductive choice and healthcare access for women in New York State and throughout the country. She served on the national board of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, has participated actively in Reform Jewish Voice of New York State, and serves on the Clergy Advisory Board of Concerned Clergy for Choice. She has also been an activist in the movement to reach an equitable conclusion to the Kotel Agreement, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and has been an active member of Women of the Wall, frequently speaking on its behalf here in the United States. Among many other accolades, Rabbi Goodman was the first woman to be elected president of the New York Board of Rabbis. She is also a senior rabbinic fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Rabbi Goodman holds a Master's of Arts in Hebrew Literature, a Doctor of Ministry degree, and an Honorary Doctor of Divinity, all from Hebrew Union College. We are so delighted and ever grateful to welcome Rabbi Dr. Linda Henry Goodman home to Temple Emanu-El.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sapaden, and of course to Rabbi Davidson, Rabbi Ehrlich, and student cantor Anderson, and also to Andrea Kopel of the NCJW for sponsoring this Shabbat, this Repro Shabbat. I can't tell you how wonderful it is and how inspiring it is to be back, albeit virtually, at Temple Emanu-El, which has always been a source of great inspiration to me. As you know, last Shabbat, January 22nd, was the 49th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision known as Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion in this country. For almost half a century, we have counted on Roe v. Wade as settled law. However, at this moment, it would seem that for some on the Supreme Court and the governors of almost 20 states, it is anything but. Rather, there is great peril. Will Roe v. Wade live to see its 50th anniversary? I have been in this fight for my entire adult life. My entire adult life. But unfortunately, at this moment, I honestly do not know the answer to that question. Last week, our Torah portion was Yitro, in which we read the 10 Commandments. For biblically based religious traditions, a statement of some of the most basic ethical mandates that are incumbent upon all of us, even given the differences of interpretation. Our parasha this Shabbat, Mishpatim, rules, statutes, continues from last week's and is known as the Covenant Code. But unlike the more concise, more universal ideals that are expressed in the Decalogue, Mishpatim takes us more deeply into the woods, if you will, of how lofty ideals might translate into daily interactions in society. Now, Rabbi Ehrlich and Andrea Kopel both have explained why, if the anniversary of Roe v. Wade was last week, it is this week that NCJW has designated as Repro Shabbat. So forgive me for a little repetition, but here is a little repetition as to why. One of the discussions within the Covenant Code focuses on retributive justice. When injuries of one sort or another are inflicted by one individual upon another, what sort of retribution should there be? And the particular scenario here in chapter 21 reads as follows. When two or more parties fight, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life. And then it continues, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. We all know these verses as they are identified in Western jurisprudence as lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, the issue of retributive justice is a whole world unto itself, which requires an extended scholarly discussion. Nevertheless, there's one point that has direct bearing on the issue at hand for us today. As the rabbis of the Talmud and later codes elaborated upon this formula, their basic consensus was that, in fact, lex talionis here in Exodus was just that, a formula. And by and large, these injury cases were adjudicated with the goal of establishing equivalence. What is the worth to me of the damage you inflicted, and then exacting monetary compensation? The only exception within this formula, and the one most relevant to us today, is this piece. If a pregnant woman is pushed and she suffers a miscarriage, the one responsible is fined, and the one who determines the fine is the woman's husband. But if other damage ensues, namely, if she dies, then the penalty shall be nefesh tachat nefesh, life for life. The fetus that was within the woman is not characterized as a nefesh, a person, and the penalty is not the same as if a living person had been killed. And thus this passage in Mishpatim, the covenant code of Exodus, became the locus classicus, if you will, of the entire Jewish discussion surrounding abortion. That's why the NCJW designated this Shabbat as Repro Shabbat, and also because, as we know all too well, the sledgehammer over Roe v. Wade is getting lower and lower and lower. It's important for us as Reform Jews to recognize that, in fact, within the larger Jewish community, there is a wide range of interpretation as to the exact nature and status of a fetus and the relationship of the person within whom that fetus is growing. The general tendency of the halachic perspective, Orthodox Talmudic perspective, consists in these basic points, if I may. Number one, whatever that is within the womb of someone who is pregnant, it is not a nothing, it's a something. Then again, there's a disagreement about when it becomes a something, anywhere from several days to a number of weeks, and even months. Number two, while that something, that fetus, is a potential life, it is not yet an actual life and does not possess a distinct juridical personality. It is not on a par with a living human being, a nefesh. And number three, the one who is pregnant does have a responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of that fetus, that potential life. But if a pregnant person's life becomes endangered by that pregnancy, then in many instances, that fetus is considered as a rodef, a pursuer. And just as one may use deadly force in self-defense from a pursuing criminal, one is required to destroy the fetus if it is seriously endangering the mother's life. Many Orthodox authorities also have identified the suffering or even potential suffering of the mother as justification to end a pregnancy. So here's a very sad example. If amniocentesis reveals the presence of Tay-Sachs, a terrible genetically linked disease, then terminating the pregnancy is justified. Tay-Sachs, of course, generally results in an agonizing death within the first few years of life. And to spare the mother the anguish of watching her child deteriorate and die, halachic authorities permit the termination of these pregnancies. And there are many other examples. All this being so, once the head of the fetus has emerged from the birth canal and it is breathing on its own, the line is drawn. The fetus may not be harmed because now it is no longer a fetus, but a full nephesh, a living person, and one life may not be pushed aside for another. When the head is out and it's breathing on its own. Now, as Reform Jews, we respect our Orthodox friends and their reading of the tradition. But in fact, we are not a halachic movement. Our decision-making, while informed by the tradition, also embraces contemporary insights from our society at large. And particularly critical in our thinking is the principle of personal autonomy and respect for decisions of the individual. Every individual, we believe, possesses moral agency, the ability to discern what is right. Everyone, in consultation with family, clergy, and of course, medical professionals, has the right and responsibility to make decisions affecting their health. These decisions should rest with us, not the government and not the courts. The right to privacy and personal autonomy, and this was the essence of the 7-2 Supreme Court decision known as Roe v. Wade 49 years ago. Please note that while there are some significant shadings of difference between Reform and Orthodox thinking, there is no daylight between us on the need for the government to stay out of these decisions. The Reform movement's approach also encompasses broader societal implications on abortion restrictions. We all understand that before Roe, women with money and connections often could manage to terminate their pregnancies in a hospital, especially in New York State, under the guise of the so-called therapeutic abortion. But this vocabulary was invented in order to perform a procedure that purported to be necessary to save the life of the mother, because that was the only legal reason for any doctor to perform an abortion. But it also became a buzzword to accentuate the differences between rich and poor, white and black and brown, married and single, privileged and underprivileged. Because women who were non-white and of severely limited resources could rarely, if ever, make the necessary connections and pay the necessary fees to obtain therapeutic abortions. And even though New York State legalized abortion in 1970, fully 3 years before Roe v. Wade, most people didn't have the funds or the connections to travel here. Some could not leave their jobs for the time it would take. Sometimes they had other kids at home and there was no one else to take care of them. So the majority of women who found themselves in this unhappy position were trapped. And many took desperate measures. Now, those of us who are old enough to remember know that the images of the coat hanger and back alley abortionist are not figments of colorful imaginations. They were real and they were rampant. They maimed and they killed. Women all over America had to bear the scars and trauma of illicit abortions. This is what life was like before Roe v. Wade. But there was one glimmer of hope. And that was a small group of clergy based in the New York area. And indeed, the clergy have played a leading role throughout the long decades of the struggle for reproductive freedom. So here's a bit of a personal recollection, if I may, of my own travels, as it were, within the pro-choice community, and a few of the earliest and most distinguished advocates for women whom I have been privileged to know and to call my friends. Reverend Howard Moody, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory, was a Baptist minister serving as pastor of the Judson Memorial Church in Greenwich Village. Reverend Moody was painfully aware of the mounting crisis and gross injustices of the underground abortion system. So in 1967, he took a bold step. He founded an organization of fellow clergy and called it the Clergy Consultation Service, a group of about 24 clergy of various faiths. One of Reverend Moody's neighbors in the village at that time was Reverend Finley Schaaf, a Methodist minister who co-founded the organization with him. Reverend Schaaf later became the pastor of the First Methodist Church in Park Slope, and I had the honor of speaking at that church some years ago at his invitation about the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Reverend Tom Davis of the United Church of Christ served in the campus ministry of Skidmore College in Saratoga for several decades, and for many years as president of the Adirondack region of Planned Parenthood. Reverend Davis wrote a book about the clergy consultation called Sacred Work, Planned Parenthood and its Clergy Alliances. If you get a chance, try to pick it up. It's worth reading. A number of years ago, I invited Reverend Davis to Union Temple to speak with our congregation about his book, and we were struck not only by his activism, but by the clarity of his thought and purpose, and by the kindness of this man, a man of faith, utterly committed to the righteousness of his work on behalf of women and girls who desperately needed help. Reverend Carlton Vesey, a minister of the National Baptist Convention USA, who became the national director of RCRC, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. A wonderful man. Reverend Vesey preached about the power dynamics still hindering acceptance of women's reproductive freedom in faith communities. Rabbi Balfour Brickner, Zichrono Livracha, former director of the Religious Action Center and former rabbi of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue of New York, just across the park from Emanu-El. Rabbi Israel Margulis, who at the time was up at Hebrew Tabernacle in Washington Heights. Reverend Charles Strout, Zichrono Livracha, known to everyone as Chick, Chick-Strout, a minister in the United Methodist Church. And there was a woman as well, Reverend Peggy Howland, a Presbyterian minister, one of the few ordained women at that time. She once had to accompany a college student to Puerto Rico for an abortion with a trusted provider, making clandestine arrangements in collaboration with the student's parents and a fellow Presbyterian minister. And some 24 additional rabbis and ministers of various denominations. These brave men and women of faith counseled with women and made connections with doctors who agreed to work with them and perform safe, hygienic abortions, really like an underground railroad. Within the first 2 years of its initiation, the clergy consultation service within 2 years had counseled almost 10,000 women from all over the country who were seeking safe abortions and counseling and kindness from men and women of faith. Eventually, clergy from elsewhere in the country and Puerto Rico as well joined the clergy consultation, and by the time Roe v. Wade was decided, some 1,500 clergy from all faiths had joined from congregations and college campuses throughout the country. And thousands upon thousands of women turned to them as their only hope. The clergy consultation was not about Republicans or Democrats, conservatives, moderates, or progressives. It was about saving women and saving girls, all of whom were desperate to save themselves. The reason that it's so important for me to tell you this, particularly recalling the clergy consultation, is that at the heart of this fight is religious faith. Our faith, our conscience should be our guide. Not the governor of Texas, nor the governor of Arkansas, nor the governors of Indiana, Montana, Alabama, and well over a dozen more. Not just as Amy Coney Barrett, who so glibly references adoption. Not Justice Roberts, who thinks that 15 weeks is the exact time of viability. No, to every single one of them. They do not have the right to trample upon the religious sensibilities of the overwhelming majority of Americans, and most surveys say it's about 70%. And in the Jewish community, it's generally closer to 80%, who want Roe v. Wade and clear access to safe and legal abortion to remain in place. And just at the risk of repeating myself, Greg Abbott and the rest do not speak for all religious people, and they don't speak for Jews. Not Reform Jews, nor Orthodox Jews, nor conservative, Reconstructionist, or Renewal Jews. They have no right to trample on our rights that the Constitution guarantees us through the framework of separation of church and state. A reality moment. If, God forbid, Roe v. Wade is overturned, women will not stop needing abortions. Problem pregnancies, whether unintended or not viable or medically dangerous, pregnancies that need to be terminated are not going to stop happening. Rape will not stop. Incest will not stop. We all know that. We can't go back. For the sake of our fellow Americans, our children and grandchildren, our neighbors and friends and students, we can't go back to the coat hangers and back alleys. We can't go back to the time before Roe v. Wade. Never again. Instead of the restrictions and punishment from our lawmakers and justices, what we need is understanding and humanitarianism. So as a model for how we should be approaching those who are in crisis, people who need our compassion and help, I offer this prayer written by my colleague, Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, another one of those brave colleagues with whom I joined hands in the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. A rabbi's blessing. May the merciful and gracious God grant you strength in this difficult time of decision. May you find comfort and peace underneath the shelter of God's wings. May you find love, support, and understanding from family, friends, and community. May God endow your caregivers with wisdom, respect, and compassion. And may you return swiftly to a refuah shlema, a full healing in mind, body, and spirit. Amen.